want to show you how to solve quadratic equations using the square root property. So suppose I told you that x squared equals 25, and I said, okay, solve for x. Most of you would tell me that x equals 5, since 5 squared is 25, okay? But x could also equal negative 5, because if you square a negative 5, you also get 25. So when you solve this, and when you take the square root of both sides, what you have to do is take its plus or minus the square root of 25, so we get plus or minus 5. And that's what that means, a positive 5 or a negative 5. So going by when we talked about solving by factoring, what if instead I did x squared minus 25 equals 0, like we did when we were solving by factoring? Remember, we got it equal to 0. This is the difference of two squares. So I can factor it. The zero product property tells me that x plus 5 equals 0, or x minus 5 equals 0. So we get negative 5 and 5 as our two solutions. So we can use the zero product property, and that's actually faster than going, or I'm sorry, the square root property, that's faster than going through and factoring it. But you have to remember that it's plus or minus. So what if we had something like this? Now notice what's different about this function, or this equation, I'm sorry, is that it's in graphing form. So it's in vertex form. So if I were graphing the related parabola, then I know that the vertex would be 3, negative 1. So I'm going to solve this by doing the order of operations backwards. So the first thing that I do is add 1 to both sides. When I do, I get x minus 3 quantity squared equals 1. Next, I'm going to square root both sides. When I do, I get x minus 3, because the square root of something that's been squared is just the something. And here I get the square root of 1, but it's plus or minus the square root of 1. So that means the square root of 1 is just 1. So I get x minus 3 equals 1, or x minus 3 equals negative 1. And you probably want to write it like this and not just plus or minus 1, because we have two equations to solve. So I add 3 and I get x equals 4 and x equals 2 when I add 3. So these are my two solutions that I get for this equation. If I graphed the related parabola, these would be the x-intercepts. Now I have a few more things going on, or at least one more thing. Now this has been, now I have a 2 out here. Still, you're going to just do the order of operations in reverse. So first you're going to add 8 to both sides. Then we're going to divide by 2. So I get x plus 3 quantity squared equals 8 divided by 2 is 4. Then I'm ready to square root both sides, remembering that it's plus or minus. So I'm going to get x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 4. So I'm going to have x plus 3 equals a positive 2, x plus 3 equals a negative 2. So now I'm going to subtract 3. 2 minus 3, I get negative 1. Here I subtract 3, I get negative 5. Now, what do you do if it's not a perfect square? We're going to deal with those later. Right now, I just wanted to show you the strategy of using the square root property. And now, just for a little stretch, what if you just had it with all variables? Now this should look familiar. This is what we used for our y equals and talking about a parabola in graphing form. So let's just do the steps. I'm going to subtract k, and I get a, x minus h quantity squared equals negative k. Then I'm going to divide by a. I get x minus h quantity squared equals negative k over a. Next, I'm going to square root both sides. And I'm going to have x minus h equals plus or minus the square root of negative k over a. And then I'm going to add h. So, and I'm going to put, you can put the plus h out here, but a lot of times you'll see the plus h go here instead. Okay, so this actually then becomes this formula because I've taken this equation with all variables and rearranged the variables to create this formula. Now you can see that we would have some issues depending on the values of k and a because we can't take the square root of a negative. Remember, just because you see a minus sign here doesn't mean that this is a negative number. Because k could be negative and the opposite of negative is positive. So, but we would have some issues, and that's when we have some trouble, or that it might not be a perfect square. And we're going to deal with those later. But I just want to show you that once you know the steps to using the square root property, then you can do it even with variables instead of numbers.